Thank you all for coming to our second Breeders Education event with this particular committee. Really excited to have such a great turnout. What we would like to talk about today is anatomy and structure. And one of the things that is really important as we are breeders in this room, and as we aspire to continue to breed and produce great dogs, is really understanding the importance of why things are written the way they are in the standard, and also how you evaluate them. I am just going to jump into this. So the importance of structure really has a lot to do with, well, it's the whole dog. Okay, let's just be honest. It's the whole dog. But it is the key to selecting the proper brood bitch, the proper stud dog, and then keeping the correct puppy from a litter, which you plan to move on with. And having those qualities, having those skills that you can apply to your own dogs with a very critical eye is very important in terms of making progress in your breeding program. There's a number of experienced breeders, very experienced breeders with us today. And when you think about some of these lines of dogs, you can see a lot of consistency in what they've produced. That really comes down to selection and ensuring that you are picking the right stud dog for the right bitch. How do you do that? You really need to understand and look at your dogs with a critical eye. Of course, everyone has the very best dog. Their dog is perfect. It's the one we want to take home at the end of the day. And from a judging standpoint, you always want to look for virtues and reward things that are positive. As a breeder, you have to both recognize the positive and the virtues, but also understand where your breeding program, where your particular animals might fall short of what is ideal. There is no perfect dog. That dog doesn't exist. But we always want to strive to get as close as possible with health, with temperament, with conformation. That whole puzzle needs to fit together for us to have a sound base of Springer Spaniels moving forward into the future. And that's why we really had our logo developed that says their future is in our hands, because quite literally it is. And we have a lot of very experienced breeders who are starting to slow down on the breeding front. We need to really encourage younger people to become involved in the sport, to pick up the torch for us and continue on with the legacy that is the English Springer Spaniel. So selection is also very key to understanding breed type. When you read through the breed standard, there's a lot of very descriptive words. There's a lot of what might be confusing words, things like slightly, moderately. There's words that are qualifiers that might be hard to determine. Okay, well, what does slightly longer than tall mean? How do I picture that in my mind's eye so that I understand how to select? It's really essential for all breeders to have a good understanding of basic canine anatomy, but also to understand the particular traits that we attribute to the Springer Spaniel, which makes it a Springer Spaniel. There's many, many dogs. It can be any breed or mixed breed that can gait around at a beautiful trot. It might look very balanced. It might have beautiful gait, but does that make it a Springer? No. It doesn't help to have a dog that's just beautiful on their legs. They need to have some really subtle, sometimes, qualities of type that I think sometimes we can overlook, or it might not have the importance that maybe it did 30 years ago. So, okay, that was one slide. Hopefully this one won't take that long. So in performing an exam, one of the things that I was taught by mentors, oops, I shouldn't touch that microphone. One of the things that I was taught by mentors that I was fortunate enough to work with, and that is something that you should kind of train yourself up on, is learning to see with your hands. So you need to create a visual impression in your mind of what you're feeling so that you can translate that to what you're seeing on a live dog. And in order to do that, you really need to have your hands on as many dogs as possible. You need to feel dogs that are excellent and dogs that are less than, because our experience it really forms our idea of what a good front is, what smooth shoulders are, what ideal layback is. If you haven't had the experience of going over a really stellar front assembly or looking at a beautiful thick thigh with proper muscle and angulation and seeing how those two things marry together, sometimes we kind of get into that field of mediocrity, and we always want to strive to improve upon and be better breeders. So it's having a point of comparison and learning to really visualize that ideal. What is the ideal that is in your mind's eye that you're striving for as a breeder? And knowing your dogs, again, their virtues and their faults is really critical in that. So today what I'm going to do, we have a lovely demo dog who is wearing his inside on the outside, and we have a skeleton painted on our demo dog. This is Port. And Port is here to show us, to kind of give us a visual representation of the actual bones that we are looking at when we talk about elements of structure. I am also going to show you some tips and tricks in terms of evaluation. So when you're putting your hands on a dog, what you want to look for. Um, yeah, we'll go with that. So in our standard, we have over 37 points that are called out of anatomy. Some of them might be very common and familiar, and some of them might be less so. So we're going to go through that in a little bit of detail so that you guys can have a good understanding of what those terms are. Now, I am not a biologist. I don't play one on TV, but we do have veterinarians here on our lovely committee that will back me up if I get stuck on anything. So um, thank goodness for smart people, right? So we are going to start with the head. And the headpiece on a Springer is actually 30% of our breed standard. We are not what I would consider a head breed, but there are so many details and nuances that go into a correct, typical Springer head that, it can be a little bit overwhelming to try to grasp all those things. And as newer breeders, how many people have been breeding for less than 10 years? Couple of people? Good. How many people have been breeding for less than 15? Less than 20? 30 or more? Good. So we've got a nice mix of newer and more experienced people in the room. The Springer head, can be subject sometimes to preferences. I think there's definitely different styles that still fall into the correct Springer head type. But the elements that we're going to talk about are what you want to look for when you're doing an evaluation and looking at your own dogs in your own breeding program, as well as searching for others. So in evaluating the head, there's a number of different points that come up. We have, things as simple as the eye, the ear, the skull, but then there's things that might fall into that little bit nebulous category, like what is fluting? Okay, so we'll talk about that a little bit. The bite we will examine as well and look at that, and that's something very important as you're looking at your breeding program. And then some of the real key elements of type really fall to the Springer's headpiece. And, you'll hear sometimes people say, well, they don't run on their heads. And that is true, but they do need their heads to function properly. And they also differentiate them from a lot of other spaniel breeds. So one exercise that I think is kind of interesting to do is to look through and read the head descriptions in some of the other spaniels that we see out there, because those are the things that we do not want to find necessarily in our Springers. So field spaniels have divergent planes. Clumbers have massive heads. It literally is written in their breed standard, massive. So, those are not qualities that we look for in an English Springer Spaniel. The Springer Spaniel head is defined as being a combination of strength and refinement. And so it should be powerful, it should be able to do its job, but it should also be beautiful. And they should be pleasing to look at. So, Donna, I am going to step over here for a second. Hey, Porty Port. Hey. So the first thing you want to do when you're looking at a head is look at it from the front, because that expression, that soft spaniel look and feel, the dark eye with a tight eye rim and very little haw showing, that is what draws you into this breed. And that is something that, it's just, you want to look at it and go, if you look at it and go, that's a whole different thing. So, a lot of that has to do with the eye, the bony chiseling along under the eye and the side of the cheek, having enough muzzle width and depth, as well as having correct balance between the muzzle and the back skull. So when I am looking at puppies or dogs in general, one of the things I like to do is look at the head from the top down, so that you're looking at the balance between the back skull and the foreface. Foreface. So this area from the muzzle right up to under the eye and the back skull should be approximately the same length. And you will hear lots in our standard also about balance. This is one of those areas where balance makes a huge difference. If you have a head that is too short in muzzle, A, they're not as functional as hunting dogs, but B, it also throws off that soft, beautiful look that Springers are known for. Having enough lip, enough thickness of lip, and lip that is not pendulous and hanging down is also important in having that clean aesthetic to the head. And then when you look at the head straight on, the cheeks should be flat. You don't want cheeks. I'm going to turn Port this way a little bit for a minute. Good boy. You don't want cheeks that stick out, that are in parallel with the side of the skull. The widest point of the skull is right here, and there's a seam that you can feel with your thumb. On baby puppies, when I'm doing evaluations, I always feel for that seam, because the smoother it is, the cleaner it is on that on the sides of their skull, it means that their skull is not going to grow quite as wide. So if you have a puppy that seems maybe like it's got a little wider head, but you aren't quite, sure how it'll turn out or grow up, feel for that seam, and really run your thumbs down that, because they should be pretty clean back here. The cheek then tapers in, and it should be flat. They shouldn't look like they have chipmunk cheeks. They shouldn't be jowly. They should have a nice, clean aesthetic and a pleasing face to look at. The eye shape and color is very, very important as well. You're up, rat. Okay, we'll just let you not have your head held for a minute. Here, you can have them. again, having a light-colored eye, a brassy eye, really takes away from that beauty of looking into a spaniel face. Having eyes that are round, our eye shape is supposed to be oval. In our previous standard, it said almond. So if that's easier for you to remember, it's not a circle. It's shaped like this. So if you're looking at a dog and it looks like it has headlights, that is incorrect. And the eye should also be set deeply into the skull, into that eye orbit. You don't want them protruding out, for functional reasons. If they're running through the field and their eyeballs are a little bulgy, they're going to be a lot more prone to getting sticks and debris in their eye. But also for the sake of beauty, it's a much prettier expression, softer expression when that eye is set deeper into the eye socket. They shouldn't have a small eye. It should fit into the head well. So again, it's that word balance. When you look at the head, everything should kind of blend together nicely. There shouldn't be something that jars you or that seems very obviously out of proportion with the dog. So you can see he's got a nice squared off muzzle. He doesn't have a lot of extra lip hanging down. He's clean. Well, he's very clean through here when he's not on the chain. And he doesn't have a ton of extra skin under here. All of those are qualities too that can take away from that beautiful aesthetic. And now I think I'm going off script. So let me get back on point here for a second. Let you take them for a second. Oh, yeah, I did go off script. So when we're talking about evaluating the head, there's a number of things that we talk about in the standard, and just a little bit of explanation about our skeleton handout that we sent out to all of you as you came in. The points that are called out on this dog are all words that appear in our standard. And we have on the back of that form alternate terms that you might hear describing that same area or body part. So just so you have like a handy reference, there will not be a quiz. It's just for your own record keeping, but it's nice to know sometimes, what different areas might be called by different people. So when we look at the head, we talked a little bit about the balance of the head here. The other thing that we want to talk about is the stop. And if you think of it, if you run your finger along the muzzle of the dog, it's going to stop right here. And that's where the stop begins, is at where the back of the skull attaches to the muzzle. This stop should not be a pronounced area. It should be a subtle, gradual blending up into the back skull. When you get a dog that has a very pronounced stop where they might be domier up here, what breed might that remind you of? Cockers. Where did Springers and Cockers originate? In the same litter. So it's one of the things, again, that sets our Springer Spaniel apart from other breeds and other similar spaniels. Having that high brow also is very, it takes away from that expression, again, that we're looking for. So it just creates a little bit of a harsher look, and the eyes are kind of a little bit more forward instead of sitting back into the skull. So when you feel the stop with your finger, it should be a gradual rise. And one of the things that you will also feel in here is a groove that starts where the stop begins, which is confusing, but it does. And if you slide your finger along there, you'll feel it end right about here on the skull. That's called the fluting. In our standard, it's referred to both as fluting and as a groove between the eyes. But that area, again, is something, if you have a dog that has more of a solid frame of bone in that area and doesn't have that break between the brow, it changes expression. It takes away from that soft look. So that's something when you go back and feel your own dogs, or if you bring them up to do exams later, you can check that out. So the back skull then should be flat, should be relatively flat here with a bit of curvature on the sides, and nothing should be angular or obvious. So if you see something like that looks very boxy or it looks very angular, it should all be soft. Everything about the Springer expression and head is soft and pleasing. The strength comes in the jaws and the width that you get here, which allows them to carry birds easily. Another thing when we talk about balance is when you're looking at the length of the head visually, it should be approximately the same length as the neck. So what happens when you have a dog with a shorter head? You might have a shorter neck also. But this through here and the vertebrae of the neck go down below. This is a scapula here. The vertebrae go down behind the scapula. And so it ends about right here. And you can feel that change in the bony process when you kind of dig around in there. When it goes into more of the withers and you've got the shoulders here.
Stand.
Come here, Bubby.
Stand.
Good boy. Should have brought him food.
He's had a long day.
Yeah, he has. So again, that balance and measurements, those are things that you can do in your mind and visually kind of quickly, but they're also helpful to do them hands-on. So muzzle to back skull, skull to neck. And those are things you can measure with your hands easily. You can measure them with your fingers just to get that idea. And we're not talking like precise to the millimeter scientific equations. This is just visually how it should appear. Okay. I should have done this. Okay. I think I kind of went through all this already, so I'll just reiterate. So soft, gentle expression, that really has to do with the stop, the eyebrows, and the chiseling. Is everyone familiar with what chiseling is and where to find it? Chiseling. I'm going to go this way. So the chiseling on a dog, you will see, and I'll try to turn his head a little bit so it catches some reflection. You will see it under the bony, under the orbit of the eye, and at the top of really where the teeth start. That's what kind of forms that chiseling. And oftentimes it becomes more pronounced on older dogs. So your veteran dogs, as their head, this is a horse term, but as their head dries out, you'll see a little bit more of that bony prominence in there. And that's what creates that really beautiful expression from straight on, as well as the beautiful appearance from the side. We talked about eyes, and really more than any other feature in our standard, the eyes are the window to the soul when it comes to a Springer Spaniel. It's also a key element of breed type, so we don't want to, kind of go, well, they're fine, they're brown, It's something important to look for in breed type. And we talked about the approximately parallel planes. So again, viewed from the side, the top line of the muzzle and the top line of the back skull should appear parallel.
Emily.
So this is another dog's head. None of these animals are mine. These are older photos, most of them. But this is a beautiful idea of what that balance between foreface, muzzle, and back skull looks like on the side when you're evaluating a dog. So now we're going to move on to the front. You may have noticed when Donna and other people have been judging that a lot of times when you're looking for those standout dogs, you'll go back to evaluating the front assembly. There's good reason for that. And the front assembly, oops, I'm getting these all out of order. The front assembly includes the withers, which are also the top of the shoulders, the shoulder blade, which is here, the upper arm, which goes from the point of shoulder to the elbow, and then we've got the foreleg, the front pastern, the foot and pad, the point of shoulder, I pointed out, is right here. It's where these two bones come together. And then we have the prosternum and forechest. And some people think that prosternum and forechest are synonymous. They aren't necessarily. So prosternum is an actual bone. It's like our breastbone. And when you feel in front of a dog and you feel that prominent bone that sticks out, that's the prosternum. The forechest is the entire area that goes down to the brisket, which is at the bottom of the ribs. So it includes that rib cage that sits between the front legs of the dog, as well as the muscling that covers that area. So you've got, when you slide your hand down to feel the front on a dog, that area should fill your hand. You don't want something like a cathedral front, like whippets have sometimes, where your hand just kind of disappears into the abyss of hair. That should really feel, I've had people describe it like a turkey breast. It should fill your hand and you should have something there. Having just a prosternum that sticks out a little bit is not the same as having good forechest. So, what does make a good front? You want to have,
Well, thank you.
when you measure the shoulder blade, you want to feel for the top, and I'm going to try to not rub his paint off. You want to feel for the top edge of that shoulder blade. There is, what do we call it, Erin? In the scapula, the ridge, the spine. Thank you. I knew that word. So you want to feel for that spine in the scapula. And if you just rub your thumb back and forth over the top edge, you'll feel it. And that's where you want to measure from in terms of shoulder layback. It's okay, Porty. You can just stand there. Stand, stay. So his shoulder blades sit right about here. And when you measure this, a nice way to measure it is with the span of your hand. So you can use your fingers and your thumb to kind of feel from the edge of that scapula to the point of shoulder, which is right here. That measurement, when you flip your hand this way, should be ideally the same. So when we talk about dogs having balanced angulation, having good return of upper arm, things like that, we're talking about this area and this area matching. So I was taught years ago by some of my mentors of how you feel that and measure it on a dog. When you go again, you're going to get a third of the height of from here to here, again here down to the wrist and the foreleg, and then again from the wrist down to the ground. So that area encompasses the front pastern and the foot. This withers area it kind of makes up both of it both has musculature as well as the tips of the shoulder blade in there. And sometimes there are questions that we get about, you might hear the terms lay on versus lay back. So a good way to remember the difference there is lay back is how much this tip of the scapula is pointed back down the dog. So you want this to lay back so that you have a nice balanced angle here. And the lay on is how smoothly those shoulder blades wrap around the rib cage of the dog and meet at the tips. in the withers. So when you see judges or people running their hands down a dog's withers here, they're feeling both for smoothness and for where those shoulder blade tips are. When you have a dog that is bigger bodied, sometimes they are not going to have as smooth of lay on. If you think of it like a triangle, if you have a dog with a wide rib cage, like more barreled, those shoulder blades are going to sit out here. The bottom of the shoulder blades goes down to the legs, and you can tend to get movement that's a little bit wider. So sometimes on dogs that are a little bit bigger bodied, you won't have as smooth of lay on here, but you'll still have nice movement because they're able to use that front. It's able to swing freely from the top of the shoulder here. So lay on, again, is the TP, and lay back is pointing back down the dog. Any questions so far? Okay. What else? So there's a lot of talk about balance, and what balance really means is symmetrical proportion. And symmetrical proportion is in relation to other parts. So again, it's looking at what is the symmetrical proportion here and here and here. If those things are all in balance, the dog is going to be able to use its front much more freely. It's going to be able to move in a straight line. It's going to be able to swing its arm out from the shoulder. I can't do this one because I just had shoulder surgery. But you can see the arm swing freely out from the shoulder blade and not lift from the elbow. When springers move, it should be low and long. There should not be a lot of lift up in the air. You don't want to see them paddling, bending from the wrists, doing any of this funny stuff. The front is so important because it supports 60% of the dog's weight, and there's not an actual joint that holds that shoulder assembly in place. It's ligaments and muscles that wrap around and support this like a sling. So it's important to have the structure in place to support that front end of the dog. Think about when they jump off of tables or beds or whatever, they're bearing a lot of weight and pressure on that front. If they have a good column of support from the top of the shoulders in a straight line here, and then also looking at them from the front, maybe we can have them sit facing this way. You want a nice straight column of support. Okay, Port, you're not helping. Coming down from the point of the shoulder all the way down the leg. So when you view a dog from the front, the legs should be straight and strong. So that means that they have adequate bone. It means that the strength of the bone goes all the way down into the feet. You shouldn't see little tiny feet or big feet with skinny legs. That bone should be continuous down into the feet. And Pat Trotter, we have her book that we're raffling off if anybody's interested in buying tickets for that to support Breeders' Ed. She talks a lot about having a straight column of support, and that also goes for the rear end when we get there. So we'll talk about that more. So now we're going to talk about evaluating the top line and rear. I know, bud. It's a tough job.
Just stand in front of him.
So the top line is really from the point of the withers all the way back to the tail set. And it incorporates the back, which is the section behind the withers, to the croup, and then from the croup to the tail set. So all of that makes up your top line. When we talk about springers, when you read the breed standard, springers should have a firm back. It should be strong. That everything about them should give out the idea of strength, agility, being able to go and keep going. Those are terms that we have in our standard. So the parts here that might not be as familiar to newer breeders are the loin, and that's the area at the end of the rib cage to the front of where the back leg starts. And when you're evaluating loin on a dog, one of the tricks I learned years ago was to use 4 fingers, and you shouldn't be able to do more than just a gentle span of 4 fingers from that back rib to the front of the back leg. Our dogs are supposed to be short coupled, and short coupled is referring to that loin and not having a lot of back length. So while they are supposed to be slightly longer than tall, it is still slightly. The appearance is of a dog that's compact. So we don't need a half a dog out behind them. So this loin area also can be called the flank. That's kind of a horse terminology also. And the top of the loin then goes over and you will find the hip bones on top of the dog. And this area is the croup. And what you'll see on the croup area is the top point of the hip bones here. And then that joint goes down to here. And you have the ischium, which are kind of their tailbones, butt bones back here. And you can feel those 2 points, but that angle is very important. Again, when you pivot your hand, yes, sorry. Nope, I need to go that way.
Oh.
Thank you for calling that out. So when you look at the angle of the hip joint, so the top of the bones start here, down to the ischium, that angle and this angle should match your front angles. So ideally on a dog that is well balanced front and rear, you're going to have this angle and this angle approximately match. And what it says in our breed standard is that the rear angulation should never be appreciably more than the front angulation. So it may look really fancy when we have dogs with big sweeping rears, but they can't always use that. And especially if it's out of balance with their front angulation, it can really throw off some movement things there. Another angle that you're going to notice here is the hock. So this is the hock joint here. I know we always refer to this as trimming the hocks. This is actually the rear pastern. And so there's a series of bones here that then go down into the foot. And those bones should be strong. They should be not, Springers do not have skinny hocks. They're not delicate, like if you think of some of the coursing breeds and things, they have very delicate hock bones and rear pasterns. Springers should have strong pasterns. It should be approximately the same as the rest of their bone that they're carrying elsewhere in their legs. And then that goes down again into a nice tight foot. And the foot in the rear can be a little bit more compact, and it's a little bit more oval sometimes than the front feet. Not always, but that's very common and it's accepted. So a lot of people think of the angle from the ischium to the stifle and then down to the hock as being the rear angulation. But the rear angulation that's really important to match to your front angulation is here. So it's this hip to ischium to the stifle. And you want those angles to match. What happens here with Springers sometimes, so in that, okay, I need my bone terminology. So we often call this the lower second thigh, but it's the tibia bone and fibula, is that correct? That goes in here, that attaches in the stifle joint. What we see a lot of times in Springers is that this bone is too long. And when that happens, it will set the rear way out behind the dog. instead of where it's supposed to be underneath the dog. And again, when you're thinking of those columns of support, you want to have, if you draw lines from the dog's hips down to the back of its feet, you want to have nice, strong, straight lines. Dogs that are weak in the pasterns or that hock in have trouble supporting that rear, and that's where all of our Springer's power comes from. That's how they drive off the rear. So when you hear of reaching and driving, this is the reach and this is the drive. So this propels them forward, and this helps them cover ground properly so they can take a long stride. When you have a rear that is quite a bit more angulated than the front, you will also get a lot more slope to the top line. Because again, the dog is sitting, it's not balanced, it's not standing square on those legs. And you get that angle. And this is supposed to be just a gentle slope, and it's supposed to slope very gently down to the tail set. The way I like to evaluate tail set is to use my thumb and just place it right at the base. I know, Porty. Place it right at the base of the tail to feel that little divot. It doesn't need to be any more than that. We're not asking for tails to come out between their back legs. That is not, when we talk about a gently rounded croup, it's exactly that. It's gently rounded. It has a little bit of a curve to it. They should also have a curve on their hips this way. So when you view a dog from behind, you would like to see a nice rounding of a fat butt. You want a nice fat butt on a dog. And that is a combination of muscling as well as structure. So, it's important always to show your dogs in good hard condition as well. Porty says, I'm done. Okay. So other points of importance. What did I miss here? So we've got, this is your thigh, the entire thigh. This is your upper thigh and lower thigh, or second thigh. You'll hear that term sometimes. And then we've got the rear pastern down into the foot. So just in review, the back is strong and essentially level. The loins are strong, short, and slightly arched. And you can feel that when you run your hand over this area of the dog. You'll feel that slight arching. And that's the musculature in there as well. And then we have the slight sloping of the croup down to the tail set, which really it's just putting a thumb there. You just want that little bit of a rounding. Doesn't need to be dramatic. Kind of talked about this already, but the power, endurance, and agility really comes from the rear assembly of the dog. This is an important point. When a Springer or a sporting dog in general is moving, the leg should flex all the way back through the hock joint. So when you see dogs in moving pictures where the hock is still kind of in this position, everybody see that? You want this to go like that. They should point their back toes. So it's like, a graceful ballet dancer. But that means that they're really opening up and driving off that rear to full capacity and using that assembly. It also means that rear is very balanced. When you have proportions that are out of balance in that rear assembly, you oftentimes won't see that because the hocks or rear pasterns might be too long. The second thigh might be too long. If you get something that's out of whack when everything is supposed to be matchy-matchy, it doesn't help your dog in terms of performance or moving. And again, the angulation should never be greater than the front angulation. So I was coached and mentored when coming up that it is always easier to fix a rear than a front. And it will take fewer steps and fewer generations. If you start with a brood bitch or a stud dog or a puppy that doesn't have a great front assembly, you can improve upon it, but it's how many generations is it going to take for you to do that? Because there's lots of different factors that play in getting that balance. Once you have a good front, you really need to work hard not to lose it. And it's one of those things, again, that can sometimes make or break in the show ring, I think, when people are making decisions. So, when moving, we should see springers that have style, symmetry, and balance. Again, it's that balance, the angles in proper proportion. The hock, this is a picture of a dog that's opened up all the way through that hock joint and really driving off the rear. And then you can see how low that stride is. Some people, I've heard the term clipping daisies, because, the dog's feet are like sweeping low into the grass. You do not want high action or wasted motion when a springer is moving. All of those things, well, I'm going to caveat that most of the time, those things are caused by imbalances in conformation and structure. However, sometimes you'll have a puppy or a young dog that is a little loosey-goosey, roly-poly. Give them a little time to muscle up and mature, because that musculature plays a huge role in the locomotion of a dog as well. So, if the parts all feel like they're there and they're still moving a little goofy, just let them grow up and mature a little bit. So, do we have any questions or comments? We have a microphone that we will pass around. And then before we start with that, now that I've talked your ears off for a while, we have some dogs set up on tables that are all different conformation, age, experience, whatever. If you would like to go put your hands on some dogs, we have some of the key points marked with stickers so that you can easily see the different points that we've talked about today. If you would like to bring your own dog up and have stickers placed on your dog and have one of us help you go over that dog and evaluate things, we're happy to do that as well. So just keep that in mind, but we'll open it up for questions and comments first. Yes, absolutely. He's gonna.
I used to do judges education, and one of the things we talked about.
Here.
One of the things we talked about was the need for flat cheeks. And I think it's important to remember that springers have flat cheeks because they don't need a lot of muscling like working dogs.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. They don't have Rottweiler cheeks. They don't need that muscle because they're carrying a pheasant. But they do need a strong bottom jaw.
Yes.
A strong bottom jaw.
So her addition, which is very helpful, thank you, Karen. Springers definitely need a strong bottom jaw. They don't need the muscling here on the side of their cheeks, as she said, because they're not working dogs in the sense of a Rottweiler where they need to grab somebody and take them down. These dogs are carrying birds, so they need a strong bottom jaw in order to facilitate that. So that's where some of this depth is really important when you look at the muzzle depth. And I learned this term from a collie friend years ago, but underjaw is something else that you need to look at. They should have adequate underjaw so that when you're looking at it, you can see a little curved shape under their jaw. And that means that they've got enough width to that jaw and strength in that jaw to do their job, which is in my house to carry toys, in some people's house to do smart dog things and hunt. Thank you, Karen. Any other questions or comments? Yeah. So you're going to have to project, lovely.
So when you were talking about the upper thigh and then when you're talking about the upper thigh and the second thigh.
This will amplify
so many
you.
microphones.
I know. Stop. Just talk.
And then when we see, okay, and then we see a dog whose baby rear is way out. You said so that's because they have a longer second thigh.
Correct.
But do you want it to be equal to the upper thigh, essentially
Yes.
balanced, and then that helps make sure that that foot, kind of the front part of the foot, is in line with the
Exactly.
ischium, right?
Yes.
Oh.
So very good point that I maybe didn't call out very clearly. Yep, I'm going to repeat it.
It is one directional light.
Like the band? Sorry. Okay. Ugh, it's like in my mouth. Okay. So the question was, should the upper thigh and the second thigh be approximately the same length? And that answer is yes. Resounding yes. Pretty much on a Springer, a lot of these. So when you look at the dog from the foot to the hock, from the hock to the stifle, and the stifle to the top of the hip, those are thirds. So it breaks it up very nicely into even thirds. When you have a dog that has imbalance in either of these bones or angles that are not properly constructed in those bones, it will throw off that rear positioning. So when a dog is standing in a stack, sorry, Port, you're going to have to do this again. Stand up.
Stay.
When you draw a plumb line from the ischium, which are these tailbones, straight down, it should land at the toes of the back foot, right up against those toes. So if you have a dog where you draw that plumb line and the foot is way back here, that means that you've got a long second thigh. Did I answer that? Any other questions or comments? Oh, sorry.
At what age? I've heard.
You won't hear her on that microphone. I'll repeat it on this one.
I'm really loud. My question is, I've been told when you're evaluating a puppy, you look at 8 weeks. At what time after that, if you have a young dog, generally speaking, can you determine whether you have a dog that's balanced to what we're breeding to, or maybe it's time to maybe find a different home for that dog? I've heard varying.
Yep.
And so
Great question. So Cindy's question is, you look at puppies, we evaluate puppies at 8 weeks. At what age can we determine whether they're keepers or they're going to go sit on someone else's couch? That might be the $1 million question. Right. So we have if you've been breeding long enough, you've had to be patient with some puppies that you evaluated at 8 weeks that were stunners. And then you look at them at around 4 months and go, what was I thinking? You need to let them mature to, I would say, at least a year to really get a good idea, unless something is grievously wrong. All of a sudden they've collapsed on their rear, they're growing at weird stages, things like that. But it's hard to really evaluate what a dog is going to turn out like. Some of these dogs don't mature to their full capacity until they're 3-4 years old, maybe even older. But I think usually by about a year, maybe 18 months, you can kind of say, okay, we've given this a good go, but you're going to go sleep somewhere else. Any other questions, comments? Are you ready to get up and feel some dogs? Yes. Oh, good point. So, Dawn just pointed out that I didn't talk about the bite much. That was one of the bites. So, thank you for pointing that out. There's 2 different things that you want to look at with bite. Well, there's a number of things you want to look at because all the teeth count, but when you're evaluating a bite on Springers, they can have a close scissor bite or they can have an even bite, and that's still acceptable, level even. One of the things, though, when you are evaluating, especially younger dogs, puppies, that you also want to look at is the occlusion on the side of their mouth, because that can really determine if you have a bite that's questionable. I mean, some of them are scissors and they stay scissors and they're just scissors forever. Some of them go through really funky stages. And I don't know if this is factually true or not. So, Kate, maybe you can chime in here. But I've found that the bottom jaw tends to grow more slowly than the top jaw. So if I have a young puppy and there's some space between those teeth, that's not going to panic me as long as it's the top teeth that are over the bottom teeth. If the bottom teeth are in front of the top teeth at a very young age, you probably have an issue. And then if you look at the occlusion is the way that the teeth on the side of the mouth line up. And let me go back to a slide here. So it might be a little bit hard to see, but the way that the occlusion is supposed to line up is every other tooth on the side. So it should be, yes, like pinking shears is a good way to describe it. They should go like this so that those teeth are tearing and chewing. They shouldn't hit each other like this. You shouldn't have big gaps where there aren't any teeth. All of those things can cause problems. And another thing that we sometimes see is something called a rye bite. It's rye, like it's said like rye bread. It's spelled totally different. And a wry mouth actually is a problem with the jaw. So it's the jaw being somewhat twisted, which then impacts how the teeth line up both on the side and sometimes on the front of the mouth. A wry bite is a big problem, and it's not something you want in your breeding program. A missing tooth or two, that's up to you. But once you get into a lot of tooth problems, it can be hard to get out of it because it'll pop up when you least want it to. You'll have this gorgeous puppy that's born and its bites off, and it's crushingly disappointing. So just something to be aware of. Any other questions, comments? Great. Well, I really appreciate your attendance and coming to listen. Thank you. And for those who would like to stay for the hands-on portion and just get your hands on some different dogs, you can go ahead and head over to the tables. If you would like to bring your own dogs up, feel free to do that as well.
You asked if they didn't fill this out.
Yes. And if you have not filled out, this is a blank piece of paper, but if your name and email hasn't been captured, we would love to have that from you. We are sending out surveys and other information to help us formulate classes for the future. So we'd appreciate that. And then please don't forget to submit your little door prize form either, because we have some great books that we're giving out that are wonderful tools in your breeder experience. So thank you again for coming.